So if there's anybody on LinkedIn who I see on a, well, I was going to say daily basis, but it's not daily basis. It's kind of like multiple times a day, evangelizing, rebelling, having an opinion, really making a noise of themselves on the topic of sustainability. It's Emma Burlow, and we're joined today by Emma herself. Now, this is a second episode, I think, because we were talking just before we kind of went live on this one about, when was the last time we spoke? We talked about circular economy. That was the key topic we spoke about. We reckon it was about 2.5 years ago. So a lot has happened in the meantime, and I want everybody to hear the state of sustainability according to Emma, because this is somebody who really knows what is going on. Because I think for lots of us, and we're very keen to hear what you think about this one, Emma, but I think for lots of us, there is just so much we could look at, so much we could be paying attention to, but it's almost got to be too much. And if we don't have sustainability as a focus of our kind of professional life, it's almost a case of, do we kind of look the other way? Do you see that a lot? Do you see people need to be kind of held by the hand through this stuff? Because it's chaotic, isn't it?
Yeah. Thanks for the introduction, Neil. I'm glad you put the word rebel in there. I think as I'm getting a bit older, I'm feeling a bit more rebellious, and frankly, time's running out. So yeah, maybe that's the trend. But yeah, do I think things are quite chaotic? Yes, I think they are. I mean, people's lives are chaotic enough without layering all this on. So I've heard it said that climate change is a kind of amplifier to everything that's going on in our lives anyway. So, cost of living crisis, or COVID, or, food prices, or energy, or war in Ukraine, climate change and sustainability more broadly is just a layer on top of all that. So it can seem really chaotic for people. And I think the most common thing that people ask me or say to me is that they're bothered about it, they're concerned. I certainly don't have that fear anymore, but they don't know where to start. So I try to be quite practical and pragmatic in what I talk about, so that people feel that they can cut through some of that. So yeah, it definitely is a confusing place.
Last time we spoke, and as I say, it was a good couple of years ago now, the concept of circular economy, obviously it wasn't a brand new thing, but I think for the masses, and I would put myself into that category, it was something quite new and shiny, and I guess kind of exciting, because it kind of made sense. I think for lots of people, professionally and personally, the vast majority of this sustainability debate, if it's playing back against the ESGs, and all these kind of big highfalutin political things, it kind of doesn't really make sense on the ground. Whereas something like circular business or circular economy, it kind of did, because it was all about reusing, repurposing, recycling, everything really. Do you think it's been the terminology that's been the hard bit, or is there something more kind of fundamental at the kind of the heart of all this?
Yeah, really good question. I mean, circular economy is a really, let's face it, it's a made-up term. Someone coined the phrase. We don't talk about the linear economy, so why would we talk about the circular economy? We might talk about stack it high, sell it cheap. We know that's how businesses operate. We talk about fast fashion. So there are other terms that people are more familiar with, but when you talk about something that's a linear or a circular economy, it's really confusing for people. I think anything past recycling, which is a very, familiar term for everybody, becomes a bit alien, and why would that be relevant to me? So yeah, it is really tricky. Although I would say familiarity, maybe not with the term circular economy, but familiarity with the different business models has really gone through the roof. So things like repair, sharing economy, the little Void scooters that people scoot around Bristol on, being able to, borrow something rather than buy it. That became really big during COVID, community library of things, that sort of thing. Oh, sorry, there's the dog. So yeah, it has become much more commonplace, I think. Saying that, I don't think people are ready to kind of understand fully what it means to them, certainly not in their business, because they're very much usually on a path to how they make revenue. So I do use quite a lot of examples, or I try to promote good practice. Companies like IKEA or even Airbnb say to people, look, this is a sharing model. This isn't about owning second homes. This is about sharing other people's homes. Or IKEA doing loads of work on remanufacturing, reuse and repair. So I try and use those sort of examples, and people go, oh, I wouldn't have thought that was circular economy, but it is.
And there's obviously the really, really bullish kind of recent examples like Patagonia saying, our only investor or our only shareholder is the planet. I mean, obviously that's one end of a very, very broad spectrum of kind of organizations, people with attitudes as to how important this is. When you say your only shareholder is the planet, I mean, it clearly steers and guides everything. I mean, if somebody is kind of realizing that at a household level, yes, they can do more and they are starting to do more. Well, where was that kind of transition over into a business sense? Because, I'm guessing you're still seeing people who are either in denial or who are just, so say, too busy to do this stuff. So if you're a sponsor of good things within an organization and you sort of will make a big difference in your business, how are people like that actually kind of making inroads now? Because I'm guessing it has become a little easier to do that recently.
It's so difficult, but I am seeing quite a lot of really interesting things. And I'll give you an example from the carbon literacy work I do. So talking to training businesses in carbon literacy. And we can talk a bit more about what that is, but essentially what I've seen is when you get a minimum number of people in a business up to a level, so when you raise awareness up to a point, and it's quite a low critical mass really, I'd say kind of 30%. Once you get to the 1 in 3 people who have changed their mindset in some way, you see this real groundswell. And then, they're not the only person in the meeting bringing it up. They're not the only person talking about it in lunch queue. And these ideas that have sat on the shelf for literally years. I mean, I've been in this field 25 years, and I'm seeing things coming around now that I saw 20 or 30 years ago. Because there's now a groundswell of people who get it, you get that momentum. And I'm certainly seeing that. And it's giving me real fresh hope, actually, because it has been a bit of a case of ambassador, activist, waving the flag, come on, get this going. And then you're really reliant on the MD or CEO getting it and being, the equivalent of Patagonia, changing things from the top. But that doesn't happen very often. But this it's almost like peer pressure, I guess, once you get people upskilled. And that's where I'm focusing a lot of my time now, is trying to educate employees, senior leaders, and basically then you get both. You get top down and bottom up. So it's you don't have to be that lone ranger anymore.
That's an interesting 1 in 3, and that's an achievable target, isn't it? Really, I think particularly in a small to medium-sized business, you could rally the troops, so to speak, to kind of get that. So when you talk about carbon literacy, this is the kind of Carbon Literacy Trust training. We had Corbell from Carbon Literacy Trust actually on a previous episode a few months back, and he was evangelizing, the virtues of this. And I think, one of the things that really convinced me to do that training, and I did this, completed this about 6-7 weeks ago now. And it's fascinating. I want to kind of ask your view on this, but for me, it was a fascinating journey, thinking I know a little bit about being carbon literate. I found I was only scratching the surface, and that you can go so deep, but it is so accessible. I mean, it's this accessibility and this kind of, it's almost sort of taken this time, and you talk about all the years that you've been sort of in the industry. It's kind of always needed to take that time to get to a point now where it's just a tiny little footstep forward and you're into it, you can make it happen. Whereas I guess back in the day, you were kind of almost talking in a vacuum, nobody's taking it seriously. That must feel very different now.
It really does, Neil. It really does feel different. And it's great to be able to reflect on, when I first started my career, I'd be asked to do presentations that were literally called "Why Bother?" You know, why should we do sustainability? Why is it important to us? Can you tell us all the reasons why it's important to our business? Right? So that was my bread and butter in the late 90s and the noughties, and people were very compliance focused, and it was, you know, all of this was seen as a almost like a philanthropic thing to do. You know, morally, companies would do it, even though you would you know, tell them endlessly that all the cost savings they could make, and you know, we're in the era of lean manufacturing and energy efficiency, and that sort of was okay, but that sat with the factory manager and only them, or the office manager or whatever. So I am seeing complete change now, and I think, you know, the impact of things like Blue Planet, you know, that's changed consumers' views on particularly of plastic, but also the work that Sir David's done on climate. It's in people's living rooms now. You know, if you listen to Radio 4, you'll hear all sorts of programs about climate. You know, the kids are seeing stuff. So it's much more in the mainstream than it was. And obviously, we as humans go to work, so there's this crossover. The other thing I think I would say is not only has awareness gone up, and that's great, but accessibility. So you said, you know, you can get so much more information on this now, not just through LinkedIn, but through all social media. You can hardly avoid it, actually. So yeah, it's become that point where it's a kind of world's worst kept secret. You know, everyone wants to talk about it, but the challenge that people have got is being able to orientate themselves with all this noise. So, you know, should I be worried about plastic? Is it straws? Is it packaging? Like, is that better in a plastic packaging or a paper? You know, there's all these endless debates about things which are frankly just kind of noisy, when really the big problem we've got is fundamentally climate change is fueled by burning of fossil fuels, you know, whatever you're going to do with it. So the carbon literacy course does reorientate people a bit from some of the distracting issues of the day, which are important in their own right, to the big issues of the day, which are, you know, the black stuff we burn around the planet, and how much of it we use on an annual basis. So yeah, I love doing it, and I've pivoted a bit in my work to do more of that because I see such a big impact from it. It feels much more impactful than just doing a consultancy report that might sit on a shelf, you know, or might help 2 or 3 people in the team. It's like I say, this groundswell you see. I think it's really important. We've forgotten how to learn as a society, you know, together. So Carbon Literacy Project focuses a lot on peer-to-peer learning. So, you know, the stuff you just learn off your family and your mates and your colleagues. So yeah, it's a great approach.
Did you see this as kind of almost an entry level? I mean, I'm finding it sort of quite interesting. I'm putting together some courses and programs sort of at the moment with Cambridge Marketing College, and what we're looking at is kind of where to sort of position the whole carbon literacy kind of story, I guess. And did you see this as a kind of an entry level sort of introductory? And I'm not saying that in any kind of sort of negative way, because I think for lots of people, they need to understand what is the point of entry here. You know, I'm interested personally, but I don't really know how to introduce it to my business. I might not be the MD, so I might be in a marketing role or operations role. I just need to be able to get this into the business. To me, something like carbon literacy is a very kind of user-friendly sort of entry point. I see it. I mean, do you see it differently, or is that sort of something you're seeing with your customers?
Yeah, absolutely entry level. It's not to say that all of my clients are coming at it from entry level. I mean, some of them are on sustainability teams. Some of them are, you know, in charge of writing the net zero plan. So I have to up my game on those days. But it's really rare for people to stop and think about anything for several hours. Really rare. You know, most people in the workplace, although they get a bit of CPD every now and then, they don't get a lot of time to think through a topic. You know, if they get training, it might be on a product or whatever. But so I think it's almost a shock for people to have to stop and think about this for you know, 6-7 hours, the length of the course. I do my courses in 2 batches, two sessions, so that people get a bit of reflection in the middle. Yeah, I think it needs to be, although the idea that it's that length of training gives time for the pennies to drop and time for people to sort of absorb some of it. So I suppose it is entry level, but it's a significant amount of time. So it's not, you know, it's not 40 minutes like entry level. You might think, oh, I can just listen to this in my lunchtime. But I think we know that those things kind of wash over people. You know, the e-learning, you do it in a lunchtime and it's gone. Whereas this is much more about giving people chance to reflect, you know, share their views on things. So we talk about climate protest, we talk about diet and food and flying and driving and all the sort of hot potato topics. But it gives them a chance to ask those stupid questions that they're like, well, I never talk about this because I don't want to get it wrong, you know. So it removes that barrier really of not wanting to talk about it. And once they can talk about it, we can all learn together. You know,
it's that collaboration piece, isn't it? Once it is in a conversation, it's never going to stop. I mean, it's almost like Pandora's box, and once you've opened it, you can't shut the box because you can't unknow what you suddenly know.
And I've said that to people, you can't unsee it now. You will have these glasses on forever. You'll see it. And so to go back to your question about, is this an entry level? It doesn't need to be entry level, because actually everyone is on a continuum, you know, from someone who's literally never thought about it. And I've had people train who said, look, I've just never thought about this. Fine. All the way to, yeah, I'm writing a net zero plan, but you know what? This has given me time to actually sit back and think about what's important, because I've had my head full of data for, 18 months. And quite often those people then find a pivot and they say, well, actually, I think we should be pointing more towards here because, there's a blind spot or something they hadn't thought about. So yeah, I find it great. It's sort of lots of, like you say, lots of points where you could drop in and out. And we make bespoke courses for different, organisations that have got different levels of need and things. So you can adapt. You can adapt the level of learning to your audience fairly easily.
And it's almost kind of self-leveling, isn't it? Because, with the lovely thing at the end of it, which I kind of, spent some very, very interesting, you talk about reflection time, very interesting self-reflection time, and I never make enough time for me, and I should do, and I did for this, and it was really interesting, because for those people who listening to this or watching this who are not aware yet of the carbon literacy sort of process here, there is a pledge that you make as an individual going through this this particular training. And it requires you to really do a deep dive into actually what's important, what's your circle of influence, what are you valuing, and what would make the biggest difference if you were to change something. Emma, you'll know this far better than me, but it was things like changing diet, so going to maybe a predominantly, if not completely, plant-based diet, for example. It was what kind of transportation do you use, etc., etc., etc. So it was very personal. Do you think this is now the time to take this stuff personally? Because otherwise you can almost kind of just kind of say, oh, it's not really me, it doesn't really affect me, I'm fine. Is this the time to really take ownership? It feels like it.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I start with my courses are aimed at business. Lots of other people train, Joe Public and community groups and parish councils and that sort of thing. I focus on training businesses, but I train humans within a business. I don't train the business, because that entity doesn't exist. It's the people within that business. So for me, I do a mix of getting people to understand their personal carbon footprints. That helps them understand what a footprint is, all their personal choices. But I also translate that into kind of the workplace for them. So the choices they make around travel for work, the choices they make around food for work, ordering food in, using different venues, those sorts of things. And then really, really big opportunities, as you mentioned, about their influence on other people. So one of the reasons I work with businesses is because their sphere of influence is so huge, far bigger than, say, me training somebody in the village who may be retired, who's got time to go to the training. But a business, they've got supply chain, they've got the employees themselves, which could be hundreds of people, all the policies that drive the business, the culture of the business. They've got customers, they've got their marketing, their media. And then that's before you get to all the other stakeholders. They might be on industry groups, they might be even lobbying government for different things. And so for me, it's so exciting how to take what is really like you say, a germ of information. It's not, they have not done a degree in climate science, but what can they do with that level of information? And I say in my course that your influence is your superpower, basically. Because the one thing people say to me is, well, I'm just me, I can't make a difference. And, if I turn my light bulbs off, what difference is that going to make if I cycle to work? But what you can do, if you were to translate that into a work setting and you change the travel policy at work that encourages 20 people to cycle, suddenly your action is massive. So that's what I do. I spend a lot of time trying to convert people trying to get people to think more ambitiously about the influence they can have on other people. And again, I said, it doesn't mean you have to be the big activator and ambassador. I think there's a really famous video of a person dancing in a field. I don't know if you've ever seen it, Neil. And there's one chap dancing on his own. And he's really going for it, and he's on his own and everyone's looking at him. It's a bit weird. Dancing. And then after a few minutes, it does take a while, someone else joins him and dances in the field. And then there's just two people. And then a third person joins them. And this is what I mean about critical mass. Once the third person joined them, everyone joined them. And so, that Lone Ranger, who may have been going on about the sustainability policy for 10 years, once you join that person, so you can have a lot of power by just being a supporter and getting behind things. So yeah, and I love that feeling because it's I can see in the big companies I'm working with the impact that's having.
A very good friend of mine uses and not quite in this positive sense, but uses the word sheeple. We're all just sheeple. We all follow what the politicians tell us, what the media tells us, what our friends do.
Well, we're social animals now.
Everyone's sheeple. And but actually, this is a really positive use of sheeple, isn't it? Because
I'm reading this. I've got this on my desk at the moment. I don't know if you've read this, Tribes. So by Seth Godwin. We are, we're social animals. We're tribes. We stick to our social groups. We don't like to be out of the norm. We like to, we live within social norms. So just as, sharing things becomes a social norm, living a low carbon lifestyle and a plant-based diet is becoming a social norm. So it is about shifting. It's a cultural shift. So yeah, I really love that. I think that's really powerful. So that's part of what I enjoy doing.
Yeah, fascinated by this whole kind of, I guess, societal communication thing. It is, because we all are influenced by influencers. I'm not talking necessarily about the kind of big celebrity influencers who've got like 100 million, followers, etc. But we all have influencers. So people who influence us, it could be parents, it could be our manager, it could be, somebody in our special interest group or our sport that we do or whatever. But it almost means then, just kind of taking this to the nth degree, I'm kind of philosophizing here, but it's almost that we can all be micro-influencers in this thing.
100%. Yeah. I had a lady on my course this morning, and she'd said quite a lot of times through the course that, she lived in rented accommodation, she didn't have any children, she had quite a junior role in the business. So she was struggling to feel like she could make a difference. She said, we don't spend a lot of money, they weren't a high income household. So it wasn't like she had this massive thing to go at, big high consumption that she could somehow reduce. So she said, I feel like I'm really frugal and, I'm really struggling with this. And then towards the end of the course, she said, we were talking about the pledges, and she said, you know what I'm going to do? She said, I'm going to talk to my mum, who has got a, you know, more higher consumption than me. And she said, and my mum talks to everyone, she said. And she said, so if I can convince my mum, then she will tell everybody. And she said the whole family and all her friends, I know. And I thought, how amazing. And I said to her, that is just brilliant, because this completely gets us away from this, well, I'm only tiny, I can't do anything. And I said, look, it might take you 6 months or a year, and it doesn't matter, because if you change one person's viewpoint and they change another one, you get this snowball effect. And all you've done is give it a little push, which is completely different to the scary logic of we have to train all these people. You know, I sometimes wake up and think, well, how am I going to do this? But it's not, it's a domino. It's a domino effect. Okay, that 6th person doesn't have the knowledge of the first, but they're tuned into it when they weren't maybe before. And we're receiving messages all the time, aren't we? But we just blank out most of them. That once you sort of tuned into them, oh, so-and-so said, and it becomes part of your normal conversation. Yeah, so I trust in that, in terms of, you know, connecting groups of people, and before you know it, I mean, look at COVID. You know, we were fed bits of information, but lots of the compliance around COVID was social. You know, how people operated. It was kind of a trust thing, wasn't it? And you didn't do certain things because you didn't want to affect other people. And we just all learnt that as a social, you know, all our neighbours and, you know, people at work. So behaviour change is fascinating in terms of how do you get people to do things. Yeah, it's not as hard as it looks. But I mean, for years we've been trying, but yeah.
I was just going to say, it's so different. This conversation that we're having now is so different to just 2.5 years ago, when we were speaking on the same kind of topic, but the different threads, the different kind of mindset, the kind of the different feel that it's got now. It is so encouraging, isn't it? I think in lots of ways I was kind of maybe a little disillusioned. I stuck with it because it's the kind of stoic character I am. I'm never going to let this thing go. But I think for lots of people, it could very easily have been, oh, it's just too hard to do, I'm just going to carry on with my day job. But it just kind of felt the right thing to do. Do you think a lot of people are now kind of understanding that this is the right thing to do? But it took things like, you know, the wildfires down in the southeast of England, you know, in the summer, to kind of be that trigger, or it took something else that was maybe a little bit more local to people to sort of think, oh, right, now I've got to do it. I've heard this for some time, but now is the time. Because there needs to be a sense of kind of urgency with this, doesn't there? Yeah, I mean, you must see things happening at a faster rate now than they probably were, say, 5-10 years ago.
Oh, terrifying! Yeah, I think, you know, they say a little knowledge is dangerous. You know, and we've got such access now to the knowledge, so we know about things. So it is a more anxiety-inducing space to be in, because, you know, you can see all this stuff happening all around the world, whereas maybe 20 years ago we'd have just seen what was on the news and that was it. You know. I think people are still split into a couple of camps. I think a lot more people have engaged, and there's been some articles recently about, you know, levels of support for, you know, things like climate protests and things like that are unprecedentedly high. Is that a word? Or at high levels. People may not agree always with the actions that are taken, but fundamentally the majority of people now agree that we have to do something, and they kind of sympathise with protesters, whereas that never would have been the case. I mean, that would have been probably 10% of people 10 years ago. So there's a real sea change in that respect. I think COVID had a bit to do with it, because people came home and they remembered what was important to them, and they stopped travelling so much, and they went, oh, really like nature, really like my garden, you know, love my family. And so those things, you know, when you're faced with a threat like climate change, you can kind of reflect on your family and the great outdoors, and you think, oh, actually, this matters to me now. Whereas I think when you're very, you know, if you're working all hours and you're working in in a big city, it's quite difficult, I think, to connect the two. Yeah, so I do see a difference in people that definitely spend more time in nature than those who don't actually. It's quite interesting. So yeah, everyone's in a different place, a different part of the journey now.
It feels like it needs to come from lots of different directions, though, doesn't it? I mean, just going back to the whole plant-based food kind of example. I mean, obviously for a lot of people, it's been a lot, but some people it's been veganism has been something that they've always had and they've always grown up with, but definitely a minority. And yet, when you have vegan football teams, so Forest Green Rovers, for example, evangelising, a completely vegan football club who play on a vegan pitch as well, which if you haven't read about that, you need to go read about that. Fascinating. All the way through to obviously all the main supermarkets now giving, aisle upon aisle of plant-based foods. We're told from carbon literacy, that, eating a plant-based diet is a good thing. And then it becomes a thing that, chefs, when you go out for dinner, they've actually made an effort rather than it being, veggie lasagna is the only option on the menu. Suddenly it becomes, no, look, there's some vegan options as well as vegetarian options. It's now a thing. Do you feel that these kinds of topics, which obviously all make a little contribution, we're talking little steps here, do you feel that each one needs to be, to come at you as a human being from multiple directions before it's taken seriously? Because that's kind of how it looks, isn't it, with an example like that?
Oh, yeah, definitely. And what do they say? There's 7 in marketing, that you have to see something 7 times before you'll buy it or something. There's this, the whole way that marketing works is to subliminally, if you like, or put things in front of people. Okay, so you might hear something on the radio, an advert, but you don't really fully take it in. But you might drive past a billboard that talks about, and then you don't think anything of it. But then you might be, on Facebook or something later, and something pops up, and it's exactly the same in real life. I mean, that's how we make buying decisions. We don't randomly stumble across a brand. We kind of go, oh, I've heard of, and then, Sue said she bought this from this place. Oh, I'll look on that website. So you've had 4, you've heard the radio, you've seen the billboard, you've looked at Facebook, an advert popped up, and then Sue said she's bought it, and suddenly you're in, But one of those things wouldn't have been enough necessarily for you to make that buying decision. So I think you're absolutely right. And one of the lovely things about carbon literacy is we do a lot of time, give people a lot of time to tell us their stories. So you've always, in a group of 10 or 12, you always have at least one vegetarian, sometimes a vegan, maybe 2 or 3, or just a law of averages. And so then you might have other people who say, well, actually, I'm sort of trying to reduce my meat intake. So you can get those people and sort of, how was it for you? And I've had people say to me, I was really surprised that we've got vegans working for us, as if it's like an alien thing. People it just needs normalized. So once you start seeing it here and there, and someone in your workplace brings in a vegan chocolate cake or something, it just takes away that kind of weirdness. But I mean, it's always been the same for me, because even with, I think when we spoke last, I talked about my Circular Economy 100, which is still going, but a bit slow at the moment. That's about talking about mainstream things that businesses and brands we buy every day, that we've just never thought about being circular. Okay, so, everything from reusing Lego to renting Rub Doctor to do your carpets on the weekend, to getting your shoes healed at Timpson's. They're all circular, and they're all lower carbon than the alternative. So it's all out there. You've just got to turn people's heads towards it.
So when it comes to turning those heads, I guess a lot of people, I know a lot of people listening to this are communicators. They might be in marketing or sales or entrepreneurs or small business owners. And I know, because that's a lot of the people who listen to this particular podcast. If they're listening to this and they're thinking, okay, some of this stuff sounds really interesting, I need to kind of align, not necessarily internally my activities, but I need to align my branding and my messages with some of these key themes, because what I do would relate to some of these stories, be it plant-based or circular economy or whatever. Without kind of going down the greenwashing route, do you see kind of a method or methodology where people can kind of begin to communicate their relevance in some of these topics, some of these stories? Because it feels like as a business, you kind of have to have an opinion on this stuff. Otherwise, you're just doing the old school kind of style of business operations. It feels like you need to be aligned with some of these topics. I mean, where would a business, I mean, say a small business, for example, not necessarily a startup, but a small business already operating, where would they begin to communicate their sustainability and how they're kind of doing stuff or aligning with particular topics? I mean, where do you begin with something like that at the moment?
Great question. And I think that is where a lot of people are at, to be honest. The word that popped into my head as you were talking about that is, was honesty. Honesty is the best place to start. So if you're just starting, say we're just starting, we don't know it all. Transparency is the other brilliant thing. We want to learn from you, our customers. Tell us what's important to you. So that opening up the communication channels. I think the worst thing to do is or two things to do is to do nothing, is to just, or we don't know anything about it, so we're not going to say. Or equally to go, well, we don't know much about it, but how hard can it be? And, sort of spray and pray in terms of greenwash. So, we do get those polls. And in the middle, we get really authentic, honest and transparent businesses that say, wow, this is really interesting. We think this is important. We're learning. And you can just tell in their comms, it's just written authentically, that we don't know it all. But hey, here's the top three things that we think are important. We'd love to hear from you. I mean, that's where I'd start. I'd just get a team together in the company, and I'd almost kind of brainwash or hotspot, what is it you do? What's important? Are you in food? Are you in white goods? Whatever it is. And then don't talk about something completely random, talk about what's important to you as a business. If you're a haulage company, talk about transport. Don't talk about, fish fingers or something random. So greenwash is not only about, I guess, telling fibs, but it's about not pointing at the right things as well. Or distraction. There's quite a lot of that about, oh, look at our brilliant packaging. Like, oh, we seem to have missed the point there, that there's the product that's the problem, So being really honest, being really communicative, I think is a really good place to start. I mean, you can start with things like Sustainable Development Goals, which are global goals, looking at 17 of the world's biggest problems and sort of say, where do we align with these things? What's important to us? But I would always start with the company, the people who run the business, or, all employees if you can, and say exactly that. What's our purpose? Why are we here? What's important to us? I mean, they're big questions to ask, Neil. But, then you get to people to really say, well, like, my grandkids are really important. I really wish we were doing more about climate change. You'd be really surprised the things that bubble up. We're not used to taking our heart into work and telling people what we care about. But I think that's a really good place to start in terms of sustainability, because not only do you then hear what's important to people, but you'll then get their buy-in because you've listened to them. You've basically said, yeah, it's important to us too. You're off the start line then. It's great. So a lot of communication.
And I like the idea about this kind of asking questions, not necessarily just preaching and saying, here's our statement, here's our position, and then kind of there's a full stop. By actually putting a question mark at the end of the statement, you're actually inviting people to have an opinion back. And I guess this is what's called kind of scope 2. So where it's looking beyond the walls of your own organization and saying, well, actually, who do we deal with? Not just the customer, but who are our suppliers? Kind of moving out and out and out and sort of, let's look more, deeply at, every touch point within the organization, and just kind of move beyond our walls and see if anybody's doing some good stuff. And it is a journey, isn't it? I think a lot of people have been traditionally put off by the fact that, until it's all completely squeaky clean and completed, we shouldn't talk about it. Whereas a journey is now what people are looking for.
Yeah, frankly, it will never be completed. So you'll be waiting a long time. And, with our net zero, we're asking people to essentially make commitments to things they don't know how they're going to solve. And so that is people find that quite difficult. Now, they will obviously get data together and they'll have an idea of their footprint, hopefully, before they make any of those commitments. But other businesses, they really won't know how they're going to meet those Scope 3 reductions. But, we're all in the same boat. We haven't got time to wait. So the best thing you can do is collaborate with others who are in the same boat, and work it out between you. So work it out with your key suppliers, work it out with your customers. It's really powerful, I think. And some brands are doing this really well, communicating with their customers, working in their supply chains. Others, I think the ones who are probably a bit further behind, don't traditionally operate like that, so they're finding that a bit of a challenge. So we need to share and learn. Back to this tribal thing, we can't expect every business in the world to learn in its silo without talking to any competitors or anybody else, because we haven't got time for that.
Yeah, and I think it's so important, isn't it, what you said earlier, about this is kind of really sort of focus on what it is you do. So, don't try and again, maybe this is where people kind of fall foul of the whole kind of greenwashing sort of issue, is that they're trying to kind of almost outperform or outmarket themselves, and they're trying to sort of say, look, we are doing this, we are achieving this, whereas actually just a bit of honesty. And nobody minds somebody who's still taking that first step, because it's, well done you. You've taken that first step. The rest of the industry isn't actually all they say they are, but we don't believe them. We'd much rather you say you've taken one step than 20 steps which aren't true.
Yeah, correct. And that's why it's really difficult, because it's almost now being used as a bargaining chip or a competitive edge, when, frankly, keeping the planet safe to hand it on to the next generations isn't about competing. It's just about being a decent human and not trashing the place. But people have turned that into look at our packaging, or look at our whatever, and it does detract from the really hard work, which is the nuts and bolts of it can be a bit of a grind, trying to work out how you're going to even operate in 10 years time in this changing landscape. It's a challenge for marketing departments, because they want to talk about the good stuff, but they can't talk about it in the same way as maybe they could other aspects, which you can kind of, I guess, hype up if you want to. Something's glossy and shiny, but you can't do that with sustainability, because immediately you fall foul of the Eco Claims Code, and rightfully so, you shouldn't be making claims that are going to mislead people.
So are you saying that we shouldn't be marketing with it, because obviously I'm a marketer, so therefore I'm always looking for the marketing angle or spin on things. It's just in my DNA. I've programmed to do it this way. But so are you saying that isn't the right way of doing it, and all we should really be doing is almost documenting the process, rather, or the progress in the process, rather than sort of thinking, look, competitively we're doing it better than that competitor there, so therefore we'll use it as a marketing story. Are you saying it needs to be just a little bit more pragmatic than that?
So interesting, because yes and no. I'm definitely saying don't not market it. If you've got good stuff to talk about, you should talk about it. That's great. I think where it falls foul is where people are talking about things that are either insignificant, and it's just like literally stuff to talk about, or completely miss the point. So this sort of distraction thing. Or making claims that they can't back up, and that's some of the companies that have been through the courts recently, the Advertising Standards Agency in the Eco Claims Code, is where they've made claims. Let's say, I don't know, this product is planet friendly, or this product is eco friendly, or this is the most sustainable, bar on the planet. And you go, oh, where's the evidence for that? You know, always reminds me of Carlsberg, probably the best beer in the world. You know, it's hard to argue with that. But it's where they got carried away and they've gone, oh, this is the most sustainable because someone told us in a report that it was. You know, so that's where it's gone too far. But no, I think we should definitely market. And actually, I was just going to say, I saw read something last week on LinkedIn about how actually companies are now sort of under marketing things because they're scared of getting it wrong. So that's the other thing. So actually, you should talk about great stuff, because how on earth are we going to make other people aware of it if we don't, you know, market it? But there are now there is a feeling that people are underselling their credentials because they don't want to be kind of, I don't know, hauled over the coals because of it. So it's a fine line. We could do a whole nother podcast on greenwash, Neil. It's a really fine line. But I come back to, I always say to clients on this, honesty, integrity, transparency. You can't go far wrong if you stick to those things and you test your messaging. You go like, how do we prove that? Like, can we say that? You know, how do we know it's the most sustainable shampoo bar in the world? Like, compared to what? So if you do those tests, you should be fine. But no, absolutely, you should market the good work you're doing, whether it be social, environmental, you know, because it sends signals to other businesses as well.
Yeah, I think that's obviously key, and it is. I think it's something we're all on this journey. And again, I go back to our previous conversation. It feels different now. It feels like, you know, as marketers or communicators, we've almost got permission now to do it. Back then, it felt like, oh, I don't know if I do it. You know, if I'm not a brand who's got, you know, huge heavyweight budget behind me to show and to kind of do that testing, I really probably shouldn't go there. Whereas I think now, we've all got the opportunity to do it, and I think enough of us are doing enough stuff to kind of be able to filter out this that, as you say, is not that relevant or important, and focus on where the real true value is coming through. So I think that would be interesting.
And focus on the fact that it's tough. It's not easy for everybody. You know, easy being green is the kind of classic. No, it's not. It's not easy. It's going to be hard. But as a brand, you know, we're here to help. This is what we're doing. This is our sort of long-term goal. You know, all those things show progress. So there's a lot that you can do. And actually, I was going to say, whilst we're ever grateful to climate scientists for telling us, you know, on a daily basis the situation we're in, I firmly believe that it'll be communicators that solve this problem. It's not a problem that you know, we understand the climate science, but we have a real issue with communicating it to people, you know, and I mean globally. So, we don't have a lack in that department anymore. Unfortunately, we know exactly the trajectory we're heading, but where we lack is enough communication. And unfortunately, we're getting misinformation as well, and, you know, all sorts of stuff, conspiracy theories and things all over the internet, which is only small, but it's noisy. So, going back to your point about the role of marketers, I think they have a responsibility, and their superpower is pushing out the right messages, you know, so that people don't fall foul of anything else. Consistent messages, you know. There's plenty that can be done.
Where's this all going, Emma? Tell me, get out Emma's crystal ball. And I mean, we did 2.5 years ago. We had this conversation. It's now so different. I want to go beyond the 2.5 years, 5 years. Go forward 5. Emma's crystal ball. What does it say? What's this all going to look like then? I'm not going to hold you to it, but I'm just curious as to what you think we'll achieve by that point.
Where we'll be 27. Well, we'll be well on our way towards 2030, which is when we're supposed to have halved our emissions. And so I talk to people about that on a personal level, on a business level, on a government level. I mean, that's the government's commitment, is to halve our emissions. Now, a lot of that will come through changes to national grid, because they are all over it. You know, thankfully, they're really on a good trajectory. But there's other things like, you know, will we have shifted to electric vehicles? Will we still be, you know, building houses in the same way as we are and powering our hospitals and schools and things? Probably not. You know, by then, quite a lot will have shifted, I think, because these things, these transformations, go on this this curve. You know, you have this long adoption, the early adopters, and then things just ramp up. And so I think by 27 we'll be starting on that ramp up curve. So I know it seems like a while, 5 years, but you know, you think about 5 years ago, things were quite different. Lots happened in 5 years. So yeah, I would expect things like solar panels on people's houses to be the norm, not unusual. EVs to be pretty much the norm. Maybe not for everybody who can afford them, but for, you know, professional people or others. So yeah, I think it's going to be quite different. I don't think that's probably the case in every country. I think others, again, are on a different part of the journey. But I think certainly in the UK and Europe, well, I'm going to say fingers crossed, if we carry on the positive trajectory that we're on, we will see quite a big change in 5 years. Definitely.
So there we have it, Emma's view of 5 years' time, but knowing what you can do today, and yes, you can make a difference. So if you're still listening to this, you are an influencer, whether you like it or not. So gather your sheeple around you and, you know, just lead by good example, be a wholesome person professionally and personally, and watch others follow in your wake. It seems that is the way. So Emma, I think.
Well, someone else said to me, you know, what else would you do?
And there it is. Yeah. What are the choices we got?
What else is there to do?
We've got to do it right. Exactly.
We've got to do it right. We're only going to get one shot.
We are indeed. So thank you again for your time, Emma.
No,
it's just
been
really
quick,
fascinating.
So thank you.
Yeah, really, really good. So I will put contact details in the description below so that if you wish to carry on this debate with her, you can do so. And also for carbon literacy training, because, yeah, you will want some of that. So contact her for that and find out how you can, yes, become more carbon literate. It is a great thing to do, and I can speak from personal experience. So thank you again, Emma. And maybe 2.5 years' time, no, more recently than that, we'll catch up again and we'll give people the
Hope so. Good to see you.
Part 3.
Lovely. I'll look forward to it. Good to see you.